To have eyes to see, oh, what a splendid and rare thing! To see beyond the veil of appearances, to pierce through the gossamer curtain of illusion that veils reality. The liquid orb of consciousness we call the eye is placed at the threshold between inner and outer worlds, between the perceiver and the perceived, between the known and the unknowable, between the observer and the observed. Better than your words can say, your eyes tell me all your danger, whispered Nietzsche through Zarathustra's lips. For the eyes betray what the tongue conceals, mirroring the abyss that lurks behind our carefully constructed facades. The serpent knew this when it promised Eve, "Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." The primordial temptation was not of power or pleasure, but of sight, of vision unbound from innocence, of consciousness awakened to its own nakedness. The eye that beholds darkness must eventually turn inward. May the frightfulness become so great, Jung implores in Liber Primus, that it can turn men's eyes inward, so that their will no longer seeks the self in others, but in themselves. For what use is external vision if we remain blind to our own depths? When consciousness approaches the unconscious, it illuminates and transforms. The light penetrates the darkness, and darkness infuses the light, each forever changed by their sacred marriage. Eyes are not merely instruments of perception, but cosmic symbols etched into the architecture of existence. They are round and, in common speech, are likened to cartwheels, as Jung observed. Rotating through dimensions of awareness, they are the multiple luminosities of the unconscious, scattered like stars across the firmament of the mind, as what Jung called multiple eyes, polyophthalmia, and the starry heaven. They are the scintillae or divine sparks imprisoned in matter, awaiting liberation through consciousness. From the depths of Mesopotamian clay to the heights of Egyptian cosmology, from the dollar bill to the seven-eyed lamb of Revelation, the eye persists as humanity's most profound metaphor for awareness. It is simultaneously vulnerability and power, receptivity and projection, window and mirror. The eye does not merely see, it reveals, it illuminates, it transforms what it beholds. To recognize your reflection in the Helix Nebula is to understand that the cosmic eye gazes back. The universe observes itself through your observation. The ancient alchemists knew this when they wrote of the fish's eyes, viewed as luminous points that shine in darkness and particles of consciousness, scattered throughout existence, waiting to be collected into the unified gold of awakened being. This video is an initiation. We traverse cultures and centuries to awaken vision, to recover the art of seeing with eyes unclouded by habit, prejudice, or fear. For as Marcus Aurelius reminded us, a healthy pair of eyes should see everything that can be seen and not say, "No, too bright." Even when the light blinds, even when the vision terrifies, the courageous eye remains open. This is our task, to follow the thread of the eye through labyrinths of symbol and meaning, to trace its reflection across the waters of time, and perhaps, if we are fortunate, to glimpse through all these myriad eyes a single vision that unites them. For as Meister Eckhart proclaimed, "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowing, one love." As you already know, I am Irrevelato, and I reveal the secrets we deserve to know. The stories our bones and blood tell us to seek, and it is never a little thing to have people around you to see what you see, even if you are hundreds or thousands of miles apart. The eyes of our minds are always connected. The eye is a central symbol of Irrevelato. Therefore, this video is very important to me. Before we dive in, a quick note. What you're about to watch is an essential journey through eye symbolism across human history. We'll explore eye symbolism in ancient civilizations, including Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Norse mythology, examining archetypal patterns like the autonomous eye, the wounded eye, the cosmic eye, and the eye of judgment. Then we'll learn how eye symbolism evolved in organized religions, including Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Cao Dai, as well as the concept of the evil eye across cultures. Further, we'll trace how philosophers from Plato to modern phenomenologists analyzed vision as central to understanding knowledge, perception, and consciousness. Last but not least, we'll look through our psychological eyes to understand how Jung, Freud, and other psychologists interpreted the eye as a symbol of the psyche and consciousness. For those who want to go deeper, I've created an extended director's cut on Patreon with additional sections on how alchemical, mystical, and occult traditions used eye symbolism in their practices and teachings. On contemporary manifestations of eye symbolism, including surveillance technology, digital media, and the transformation of ancient symbols in modern contexts, on how celebrities and popular culture have adopted eye-related hand gestures and poses, and on the future evolution of vision and consciousness. Think of it as the difference between visiting a museum and getting a private tour with access to the hidden archives. The link is in the description if you're curious. I work like a madman to accelerate our enlightenment. That's what I have to offer. If you think or feel that my mission and efforts are worthwhile, support my work on Patreon, where you'll find extended versions of this video and other future ones, alongside more of my thoughts and questions. If you are a patron, a benefactor, a philanthropist, a philosopher king, or an eternal son, or any other kind of paid Patreon member, you know you have my deepest appreciation, and no words can truly describe it. To you, I dedicate this video. Now let's open our eyes. Long before the scientific understanding of vision, ancient peoples recognized the eye as a portal of power. The earliest expressions of eye symbolism emerged from the primordial depths of human consciousness, etched into clay, carved in stone, and woven into the earliest myths of creation and divine awareness. In the cradle of civilization between the Tigris and Euphrates, we find our earliest evidence of the eye's sacred power. Among the most enigmatic artifacts from ancient Mesopotamia are the eye idols of Tel Brak. Thousands of small alabaster figurines dating to 3500 BC, their bodies reduced to mere pedestals for enormous hypnotic eyes. These wide-eyed sentinels stood in temples, their unblinking gaze both protective and unsettling, witnesses to rituals lost to time. The archaeologist Sir Max Mallowan excavated Tel Brak in the 1930s. In his 1947 report, Excavations at Brak and Shagar Bazar, Mallowan notes, "In the present state of our knowledge, there are very few archaeological discoveries which can be described as unique. But one class of objects from Brak is unique, the eye idols or images which turned up in thousands in the grey brick stratum of the earlier eye temple. What he had uncovered was perhaps humanity's first mass-produced religious symbol and culture's collective attempt to manifest the power of vision in physical form. The temple where most were found has since been called the Eye Temple, suggesting a cult dedicated to a deity of vision, perhaps Ishtar as the Watcher. The Mesopotamians intuited what later cultures would articulate. Eyes were not merely sensory organs, but conduits of power. To see was to know, to witness was to participate, to gaze was to influence. The eye represented the boundary between passive observation and active force, a concept that would reverberate through millennia of myth. In Sumerian, the word for eye, IGI, frequently appears in expressions relating to perception, insight, and awareness, reflecting a profound symbolic connection between seeing and understanding. Mesopotamian literature often described gods as beings with superior vision and insight, metaphorically depicted as having eyes wide open, in contrast to mortals whose perceptions were inherently limited or obscured. Cuneiform texts from ancient Mesopotamia vividly illustrate this divine-mortal dichotomy, emphasizing that the gods saw clearly what humans could only perceive dimly or indirectly. In the ancient Mesopotamian creation epic Enuma Elish, the primordial chaos goddess Tiamat embodies the terrifying power of disorder, confronting even the gods with dread. When the hero god Marduk battles Tiamat, his victory is achieved through strategic insight and perception. Before striking, Marduk carefully observes Tiamat, discerning vulnerabilities within her chaotic form. The epic describes how the Lord drew near to see the inside of Tiamat, revealing that cosmic order was restored not only by physical might, but by divine awareness and the power of clear-sighted understanding. Marduk's victory over Tiamat, as recounted in the Enuma Elish, led to his elevation as the supreme deity of the Babylonian pantheon. In honor of his triumph, the gods bestowed upon him the 50 names, each representing a facet of his divine authority. His principal temple in Babylon was named Esagila, meaning house with the raised head, signifying its towering presence and central role in the city's religious life. This grand structure underscored Marduk's position at the apex of the divine hierarchy and the importance of Babylon as a center of worship. If Mesopotamia discovered the mythic power of the eye, Egypt elevated it into a principle of cosmic order. No civilization integrated the eye more deeply into its symbolic system than ancient Egypt, where the eyes of Horus and Ra became central to religion, art, and the structure of myth. These eyes continue to stare back at us across millennia, etched in stone, carved into amulets, inscribed in scrolls, and revived in modern iconography. They were two opposing forces. The Eye of Horus was blue and was good. The Eye of Ra was red and was evil. As the Book of the Dead described, Horus of the blue eyes cometh unto you. Protect ye Horus of the red eyes who is sick. Or one was light and one was dark. One was the sun and one was the moon. The Eye of Horus, or Wedjat, represented healing, protection, and wholeness. In myth, Horus lost his left eye in battle with Set, the god of chaos, during a struggle to avenge his father Osiris. The eye was restored by the wisdom god Thoth, making it not only a symbol of physical restoration, but of metaphysical integrity. Its 6 parts, assigned specific fractional values in ancient Egyptian measurement systems, were used in both grain and medicinal contexts. Scholars have argued that these 6 divisions correlate symbolically to the 6 senses: smell, 1/2, sight, 1/4, thought, 1/8, hearing, 1/16, taste, 1/32, and touch, 1/64. The eye thus becomes a schematic of perception, a holistic vision of the human sensorium encoded in divine form. The eye's significance may even extend into anatomical metaphor. A 2019 study observed that when the Eye of Horus is superimposed onto a sagittal section of the brain, its components align with neurological structures like the thalamus, corpus callosum, brainstem, and medulla, each involved in sensory processing. While there is no evidence that the Egyptians possessed detailed anatomical knowledge of the visual cortex, although we can't affirm they didn't, these symbolic correspondences suggest a deeply intuitive grasp of the relationship between perception, embodiment, and cosmic order, nonetheless. Carl Jung, in Mysterium Conjunctionis, reflects on this mythic cycle of wounding and restoration. Citing Plutarch's Isis and Osiris, he writes, "Typhon, the wicked brother shadow of Osiris, wounded or tore out the eye of Horus," and this is to be interpreted as referring to the new moon. The eye thus becomes a symbol of lunar rhythm, representing the recurring movement between wholeness and fragmentation, light and darkness, consciousness and unconsciousness, psychic integration and dismemberment. This symbolic cycle leads us to Osiris himself. In Egyptian myth, Osiris is murdered and dismembered by his brother Set. His body was scattered across the land and pieced back together by the devotion of Isis. Horus, his son, is both avenger and inheritor, restoring the divine lineage through the trials of vision and combat. Osiris, often associated with the afterlife and subterranean regeneration, also embodies an omnidirectional awareness that surpasses death itself. Osiris was an all-seeing, all-knowing deity. As the lord of the underworld, Osiris was believed to possess knowledge that transcended the boundaries of life and death. In this context, Jung's remark that the heavenly sun is the right eye of the world becomes more than a cosmological metaphor. It signals the Egyptian belief that vision is the primary axis of divinity. The historian Diodorus Siculus recorded that Osiris means many-eyed, for in shedding his rays in every direction he surveys with many eyes. This many-eyed Osiris is not a monstrous being, but an image of divine omniscience, an intelligence that illuminates the world through manifold perception. To be many-eyed is to see fully across space, across time, and across the boundary between life and death. If the Eye of Horus symbolizes integration and healing, the Eye of Ra embodies something more volatile, divine wrath and autonomous power. Often depicted as a blazing solar disk, the Eye of Ra becomes personified in myth as the goddess Sekhmet, a lioness unleashed to punish humanity for rebellion. In the Book of the Heavenly Cow, Ra sends his eye in the form of Hathor to destroy the insolent. But the eye, intoxicated by bloodlust, begins annihilating indiscriminately. Ra must intervene by offering red beer as a decoy for blood. The goddess drinks, becomes intoxicated, and ceases her destruction. Here, vision without restraint becomes cataclysm, a force that must be tempered to preserve creation. In another myth, Ra sends his eye to search for his lost children. While it is gone, a new eye grows in its place. When the original eye returns and finds itself replaced, it weeps in sorrow, and from its tears, humanity is born. This myth offers a profound metaphor. Human consciousness as the product of divine estrangement, of the pain of being seen and forgotten, found and replaced. It is an origin story rooted not in domination, but in loss and longing, a cosmic grief that births perception itself. This reverence for sight permeated Egyptian ritual and belief. The eyes of the deceased were carefully protected with amulets and ritual attention. The Book of the Dead contains spells specifically for opening the eyes in the afterlife, suggesting that resurrection itself was ultimately a restoration of vision. Thou hast received the Eye of Horus. Thy table is a table of offerings. Hail Hunu, lift up thy heart to purify thy body. They have eaten the Eye of Horus, the olive of Heliopolis. They destroy what is wrong in the body of Osiris. To see was thus to return to life. Beyond Horus, Osiris, and Ra, the motif of the eye appears throughout Egyptian religion. It adorns tomb walls, crowns, ritual vessels, and temple architecture. It was painted on coffins, placed on ships, and inscribed on papyri. In every context, the eye remained a symbol of divine presence, watching, guiding, healing, punishing. It signified not just physical sight, but the capacity to illuminate and order the world. The eye was Egypt's great metaphor for consciousness, focused, watchful, and sacred. And then in Norse mythology we encounter a profound inversion of the eye's significance. Rather than gaining power through sight, the god Odin, Wotan, sacrifices one eye for inner wisdom. At Mimir's well, the source of all wisdom, Odin surrenders his eye in exchange for a drink from the sacred waters. Wotan, who sacrificed his eye at the spring of Mimir, Jung writes in Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, represents the paradoxical truth that external vision must sometimes be surrendered for internal illumination. The one-eyed god embodies the mystery that partial blindness can lead to deeper sight, a mythological precursor to the spiritual concept that the third eye opens only when physical vision is transcended. The 13th century poetic Edda records Odin's words, "I know where Odin's eye is hidden, deep in the wide-famed well of Mimir. Mead drinks Mimir every morning from Valfather's pledge. Know ye yet or what?" This cryptic verse suggests that the sacrificed eye continues to see. It becomes a permanent witness at the well of wisdom, a part of Odin that remains at the source while he moves through the world. The symbolism of Odin's missing eye takes on profound dimensions when we consider his role as the god of poetry and mystical wisdom. In sacrificing his eye, Odin transcends ordinary perception, gaining a deeper sight that penetrates the veil of appearance to grasp the hidden truths of the cosmos. His vacant socket becomes a powerful signifier of this transformation, marking him as one who has relinquished the limited vision of the physical world in exchange for the expansive insights of the spiritual realm. This sacrificial act embodies the delicate interplay between the tangible and the imaginal, or the seen and the unseen. Odin's remaining eye becomes the eye of precision and clarity, discerning the concrete realities of the manifest world. Yet his missing eye is an eye of possibility and potential that truly defines his visionary power. This absent presence represents the capacity to perceive beyond the boundaries of the known, to envision realities that lie beyond the scope of mortal sight. In this sense, Odin's empty socket is not a void, but a gateway, a portal to the infinite realms of inspiration and imagination. It signifies the willingness to surrender the illusions of the ego, to relinquish attachment to surface-level appearances in pursuit of deeper understanding. Through this sacrifice, Odin attains a form of sight that transcends the physical, a way of seeing that is not dependent on the external organs of perception, but rather arises from the inner eye of the soul. This inner eye is the wellspring of poetic vision, the source of the sacred knowledge encoded in the runes. It is the eye that can discern the patterns of fate woven into the fabric of the universe. The eye that can read the hidden meanings encrypted in the language of symbols and myths. Odin's missing eye thus becomes a testament to the price of wisdom, the sacrifices required to attain a level of insight that pierces the illusions of the material world and glimpses the eternal truths that lie beneath. Ultimately, we are reminded that true seeing is a holistic engagement of our entire being. It is a way of perceiving that integrates the rational and the intuitive and the analytical and the imaginative. Like Odin, we must be willing to relinquish our attachment to appearances, to sacrifice the comfort of certainty in pursuit of the transformative insights that lie beyond the veil of the ordinary. Remarkably, this pattern of the one-eyed seer appears across diverse cultures. The Greek Graii sisters shared a single eye between them, which granted them prophetic vision. The Celtic god Bela had one destructive eye that could kill with a glance. The Russian folklore figure Baba Yaga is sometimes depicted with one eye that sees the past and future. This recurrent motif suggests a universal intuition that complete vision paradoxically requires a form of partial blindness, a willingness to close one mode of seeing to open another. What emerges from all of these ancient myths is a constellation of recurring patterns that transcend cultural boundaries and that we can rightly call archetypes. The autonomous eye is the most striking. Across traditions, the eye frequently detaches from its owner to act independently. Ra's eye becomes Sekhmet, Odin's eye remains at Mimir's well, and the Greek myth of the Graii features an eye that passes between users. This suggests an intuitive understanding that consciousness can fragment and operate autonomously, a concept Jung would later identify in the complex that develops its own agency. The wounded eye that is damaged yet maintains or even increases its power also appears repeatedly. Horus's wounded eye becomes a symbol of healing. Odin's missing eye grants wisdom. The blind seer Tiresias gains prophetic sight. This reflects the paradoxical truth that limitation can become transcendence. Those ways of seeing beyond the physical emerge precisely when ordinary vision is compromised. The cosmic eye, as the identification of the sun and moon as cosmic eyes, appears in Egyptian, Norse, Hindu and Amazonian mythologies, suggesting an archetypal connection between celestial bodies and divine awareness. The cosmos itself is understood as a being that watches, with heavenly bodies as its organs of perception. Last but not least, the Eye of Judgment, from Mesopotamian deities to the Egyptian weighing of the heart ceremony, overseen by the Eye of Horus, represents moral discernment and judgment. This association would later find its fullest expression in the Abrahamic tradition's all-seeing eye of God that witnesses and evaluates human action. We will explore this eye in depth in the sections that follow. Thus, across the ancient world, in the dawn of human symbolism, the eye is a cosmic principle before it is an organ of sight. Or rather, sight is more than what our physical eyes can offer. Yet, Plato's form of the eye is probably somewhere out there. What's certain is that its persistence is impressive. From the clay idols of Mesopotamia to the hieroglyphs of Egypt to the one-eyed god of the north, the eye represented the fundamental relationship between consciousness and reality, between the seer and the seen, between the divine and the human. To have eyes was to possess power. To be seen was to be known. To gaze was to transform. The French philosopher Georges Bataille would later write in his work The Eye that the eye at the summit of the skull, opening onto the infinite space, is not a product of understanding, but is instead an immediate existence. This insight was already understood by our most ancient ancestors, who recognized in the eye not merely a tool of perception, but the threshold where inner and outer worlds meet. These are the foundation for religious, philosophical and psychological understanding of vision, as something far beyond mere biological function, a sacred act that connects us to the cosmos itself, a living symbol of consciousness. As myth systems evolved into organized religions, the eye kept its power as a symbol of divine consciousness, but it acquired new dimensions of meaning. In the great religious traditions, the eye became not just a symbol of seeing, but of being seen, a reminder of divine omniscience and the interior illumination of spiritual awakening. In Judaism, the eye symbolism takes a profound turn. While earlier polytheistic religions depicted their gods with literal eyes, the Jewish tradition confronts the paradox of an unseen God who nevertheless sees all. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good, declares Proverbs chapter 15, verse 3, establishing divine vision as both omnipresent and morally discerning. The Hebrew scriptures abound with references to God's eyes as symbols of divine attention. The phrase, "finding favor in God's eyes," appears repeatedly, suggesting that to be seen by God is to be known in one's essence. Yet this seeing God cannot himself be seen. When Moses asks to see God's glory, he is told, "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." Exodus chapter 33, verse 20. The ultimate seer must remain unseeable, a theological inversion of the eye's usual reciprocity. Or is God both the blue eye and the red eye? This paradox finds its fullest expression in Ezekiel's vision of the divine chariot, the Merkabah, where their entire bodies, including their backs, their hands and their wings, were completely full of eyes, as were their four wheels. Ezekiel chapter 10, verse 12. For Martin Buber, this multitude of eyes is no mere symbol of far-off judgment, but of God's immanence. Every particular thou in creation is a window into the eternal thou, so that the divine presence gazes upon and is encountered in each and every being simultaneously. The Kabbalah, Jewish mystical tradition, developed this concept further. In Kabbalistic thought, the eye represents Chokmah, wisdom, the second sephirah on the tree of life. Rabbi Isaac Luria taught that divine light enters creation through God's eyes, and these rays of vision actually sustain the cosmos. This concept of divine seeing as creative force recalls the Egyptian Ra, whose gaze brought life, but transforms it into a more abstract metaphysical principle. The Jewish mystical tradition conceives ayin, nothingness, as both the invisible ground of all being and a contemplative state, in which the individual self dissolves into divine awareness. In the Sefer Yetzirah, often called the Book of Formation, chapter 2, Mishnah 6 declares, "He made his ayin yesh. He turned his nothingness into something," teaching that all manifest reality, yesh, both issues from and ultimately returns to this primordial void. The Tikkunei Zohar, the repairs of the Zohar, in Tikkun 57 proclaims, "There is no place devoid of him," signifying that ayin is the ever-present divine gaze suffusing every dimension of creation. Later expositors, from Moses de Leon, 13th century compiler of the Zohar, to Isaac Luria, 1534-1572, and his Seift Circle, in works like Sha'ar Hagilgulim and Sha'ar HaKavanot, elaborated meditative practices in which the Hebrew letters, especially the mother letters Aleph, Mem, and Shin, are visualized ascending back into ayin, demonstrating that in Kabbalah the eye is the void of infinite potential from which all forms emerge. Then Christianity inherited Jewish eye symbolism, but refracted it through the prism of incarnation, the doctrine that the unseen God became visible in human flesh. John's Gospel proclaims this paradox with crystalline clarity in chapter 1, verse 18. "No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known." Here, the invisible is unveiled so that we might see what cannot otherwise be seen. This theme of sight as revelation ripples through Jesus' own words and works. "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." John chapter 8, verse 12. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. Matthew chapter 6, verse 22. Most compellingly, every gospel account of healing the blind becomes a living emblem of spiritual sight restored. In Mark's narrative, Bartimaeus of Jericho, a blind beggar, cries out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me," and is gifted both his vision and a confession of faith. "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately, he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Through these miracles, the incarnate Word illuminates the inner eye, teaching that to see Christ is to see the Father. "And whoever sees me, sees him who sent me." John chapter 12, verse 45. This Christian reframing of the eye finds an intriguing celestial echo in the Merkabah law. In 3 Enoch, Enoch is transformed into Metatron, the Prince of the Presence, the Lesser Yahweh, and endowed with 365,000 eyes, each like the great light, his gaze an unbroken surveillance of every corner of creation. Is Metatron's manifold vision a forerunner of divine embodiment? Or does it underscore the unique sufficiency of Christ's incarnational sight? Early theologians guarded the line. No angel, however exalted, could substitute for the Son. Yet the parallel remains electrifying. Enoch becomes Metatron, adorned with cosmic eyes, just as the Word becomes flesh, so that through one man we might truly see the face of God. Ultimately, Christianity teaches that the all-seeing eye is not a distant emblem on a golden coin or on a temple or on a dollar bill, but the pierced, loving gaze of Christ himself, visible, compassionate, sovereign over every realm, human and angelic alike. However, in the book of Revelation, this paradox reaches its most striking expression in the vision of a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne. At first, you can't help but feel sorry for him. But then something strange happens. Revelation chapter 5 verse 6 unveils that the Lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. That's bizarre, to say the least. Jung observes in Ion that this is a bellicose lamb, a conqueror, whose eyes represent omniscience, fused with sacrificial vulnerability. His eyes signify the 7 spirits of God, or the 7 eyes of the Lord. Jung continues, connecting this image to Zechariah chapter 4 verse 10. "For who hath despised the day of small things? For they shall rejoice, and shall see the plummet in the hand of Zerubbabel with those 7. They are the eyes of the Lord, which run to and fro through the whole earth." The 7 eyes suggest completeness of vision, a spiritual perception that encompasses all dimensions. The 7 eyes could represent the 7-fold gifts of the Holy Spirit: wisdom, understanding, counsel, fortitude, knowledge, piety, and fear of the Lord. Each a distinct mode of spiritual perception. Perhaps they are a manifestation of the 7 archangels or archons. This symbolism culminates in Christ's statement. "The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light." Matthew chapter 6 verse 22. Here, physical vision becomes a metaphor for spiritual illumination, the capacity to perceive divine truth. St. Augustine elaborated on this, writing in his Confessions, "And I entered, and with the eye of my soul, such as it was, saw above the same eye of my soul, and above my mind, the immutable light. It was not the common light which all flesh can see, nor was it simply a greater one of the same sort, as if the light of day were to grow brighter and brighter, and flood all space. It was not like that light, but different, yea, very different from all earthly light whatever. Nor was it above my mind in the same way as oil is above water, or heaven above earth, but it was higher, because it made me, and I was below it, because I was made by it. He who knows the truth knows that light, and he who knows it knows eternity. Love knows it, O eternal truth, and true love and beloved eternity. Thou art my God, to whom I sigh both night and day." In Jacopo Pontormo's Cana in Emmaus, 1525, the resurrected Christ emerges not with the luminous certainty typical of Renaissance depictions, but as a spectral figure whose eyes appear as darkened hollows, empty sockets that refuse to meet the gaze of the viewer. This unsettling detail resists literal interpretation. Rather than suggesting blindness, it gestures toward a vision so absolute, so interior, that it transcends the visible altogether. Christ does not see as we see. His gaze is not cast outward, but turned toward the eternal, toward the source beyond form and image. This artistic choice distills a central paradox of Christian vision, that true sight does not apprehend appearances, but pierces through them to what remains unseen. The divine in this rendering is not what is shown, but what withdraws, hidden beneath the veil of the ordinary, radiating through absence. The emptiness of Christ's eyes becomes a symbol of apophatic seeing, a vision stripped of content in order to behold the uncontainable. Moving to other continents, we find identical ideas expressed in different forms. While Western religious traditions emphasize the eye as a symbol of divine omniscience, Eastern spiritual systems developed the concept of the third eye, a center of intuitive vision located in the forehead, associated with enlightenment and expanded consciousness. In Hinduism, the third eye is most prominently associated with Shiva, who is often depicted with a vertical third eye in the center of his forehead. Unlike ordinary eyes that see the physical world, Shiva's third eye perceives beyond duality, beyond time and space. It is another form of Trinity, if you will. And when opened fully, it emits a beam of destructive fire that the revelation is familiar with. But is it random violence? Is it justified violence? Or is it the necessary dissolution of illusion? What's certain is that it is a very potent religious and psychological reality. In the Shiva Purana, there is a tale in which Parvati, in a moment of playful intimacy, covers Shiva's eyes with her hands. Instantly, the cosmos is plunged into darkness. Day ceases, life trembles, and chaos threatens to unfold. To restore balance and light, Shiva opens a third eye in the center of his forehead, radiating a brilliance that dispels the universal gloom. However, beyond its surface drama, this myth encodes a profound metaphysical insight. The two eyes, which represent ordinary perception, bound to duality, form, and illusion, are momentarily eclipsed. In that crisis, a higher faculty awakens, the third eye, the seat of non-dual awareness. Where dualistic sight fails and unitary vision arises, not to see the world, but to see through it. Thus, even in the play of love and shadow, Shiva reveals a truth. Awakening often begins in the dark. In Buddhist iconography, the Buddha is often shown with an urna, which is a luminous spiral or dot between the eyebrows, symbolizing the awakened eye of wisdom. Though not explicitly called a third eye, it signifies a supramundane perception that transcends ordinary vision. In Mahayana thought, this deeper seeing is called prajna-kaksu, the eye of wisdom. As Nagarjuna taught through the Madhyamaka school, while the two eyes perceive impermanence and appearances, it is only the eye of wisdom that realizes sunyata, which is the emptiness at the heart of all things. This vision is a recognition of that which neither arises nor ceases. In the Tibetan Bardo Thodol, commonly known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, dying practitioners are instructed to recognize the clear light, which appears as a radiant, formless awareness that dawns at the moment of death. This recognition depends not on physical sight, but on the inner mode of knowing that perceives the luminous nature of consciousness itself. Or the wisdom eye. Padmasambhava, the great Tibetan master to whom the Bardo Thodol is traditionally attributed, teaches that although this unimpeded awareness is present in all beings, it often goes unrecognized. Only by recognizing it directly can one realize the true nature of mind. This theme of interior vision also evolved in yogic traditions. In Tantric and Kundalini systems, the Ajna chakra, often called the third eye, is situated at the brow and is regarded as the seat of intuition and gnosis. Meditative practices focus energy at this point to awaken a non-ordinary perception, a faculty that sees beyond name and form. Classical texts such as the Hatha Yoga Pradipika describe inner techniques that stimulate this subtle center, suggesting that when this eye is opened, the yogi transcends karma and glimpses the ineffable. In these traditions, the third eye is thus a gateway to liberation, a direct seeing into the real. Moving forward, we find that the Vietnamese syncretic religion Chao Dai takes eye symbolism to its most literal expression, adopting the divine eye as its primary icon. The divine eye, Tien Nan, is indeed the central symbol of Cao Daism, typically depicted as a left eye surrounded by radiant beams of light. This emblem represents the supreme being, decoded, embodying divine omniscience and the ever-watchful presence of God. The choice of the left eye is deeply symbolic. In traditional Eastern philosophy, particularly within Taoism, the left side is associated with Yang, the active, positive and masculine principle. This aligns with the Taoist interpretation of God as the source of active cosmic consciousness. The left eye thus signifies the dynamic, illuminating force of the divine. Ngo Vanqiu, recognized as the first disciple of Taoism, reported receiving a vision of the divine eye in 1921 while on Phu Quoc Island. In this vision, he was instructed to adopt the divine eye as the primary symbol for worship. This event is considered foundational in the establishment of Taoism's iconography and theological emphasis on the divine eye. The rays emanating from the divine eye carry specific meanings within Taoism. For instance, at the Tainan Holy See, the divine eye is depicted with 35 rays, symbolizing the integration of major world religions and doctrines. In local temples, the divine eye often features 16 rays, 9 upward rays representing the 9 levels of heaven, and 7 downward rays symbolizing the 7 emotions that practitioners are encouraged to master. Across religious traditions, we find the counterpart to divine vision in the concept of the evil eye, the belief that certain gazes can cause harm through envy, ill will, or uncontrolled negative emotion. This belief appears in Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, South Asian, and Latin American cultures, among others. In rabbinic literature, the Hebrew term ayin hara, evil eye, represents the destructive power of envy. The Talmud warns, 99 people die from an evil eye for each one who dies naturally. Bava Metzia 107b. This represents a profound psychological insight. To be seen with envy damages the soul's integrity. Islamic tradition similarly recognizes the Ain al-Hasud, the envious eye. The Prophet Muhammad is recorded as saying, "The evil eye is real," and recommended protective prayers, ruqya, against its effects. Many Islamic protective amulets feature eyes or eye-like designs, using vision symbolism to counter harmful vision. Amulets against the evil eye are often worn by primitives on the nape of the neck. Jung notes in the archetypes of the collective unconscious, for the vulnerable spot is at the back, where you can't see. This observation reveals the psychological truth behind the superstition. We are most vulnerable to others' perceptions in our blind spots, the aspects of ourselves we cannot see. The evil eye presents a shadow inversion of divine omniscience, a reminder that being seen is not always benevolent. While God's eye represents perfect knowledge tempered by love, the evil eye represents partial knowledge distorted by envy. It is vision without wisdom, seeing without understanding. What emerges across these diverse religious traditions is a remarkable convergence of insight. The eye represents again consciousness itself in all its dimensions. Each tradition emphasizes different aspects of this symbol, yet together they form a comprehensive spiritual anatomy of seeing. The most obvious is the external eye, the physical eyes that perceive the material world, which Judaism and Christianity remind us are created by and for God. As Proverbs chapter 20, verse 12 declares, "The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both." Then there's the internal eye. This is the contemplative vision that perceives spiritual truth beyond appearances, which Christ referenced, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God," Matthew chapter 5, verse 8. Next, the superior eye is the third eye, or Ajna chakra, of Eastern traditions, representing intuitive wisdom and non-dual awareness that transcends ordinary perception. Last but not least, the cosmic eye is the divine consciousness that encompasses all, represented by Shiva's third eye, Ezekiel's vision of eyes in all directions, and the Lamb's 7 eyes. The Sufi poet Rumi beautifully expressed the immediacy of divine vision in his poem, The Melting Snow. God is in the look of your eyes, in the thought of looking nearer to you than yourself or things that have happened to you. There's no need to go outside. This suggests that spiritual vision is not merely external perception, but an innate capacity to recognize the divine presence that exists within our very act of seeing. For the medieval Christian mystic Meister Eckhart, this culminated in his famous insight from Sermon 12, Qui audit me? The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowing, and one love. This represents the ultimate resolution of the seeing-on-seen paradox, the recognition that in the purest spiritual perception, the distinction between observer and observed dissolves completely. The religious symbolism of the eye thus reveals a familiar, profound truth. Vision is a sacred act, a participation in divine consciousness. To truly see is to participate in God's seeing. To be truly seen is to be known in one's essence. The eye stands at the threshold between creator and creation, between the visible and invisible worlds, between knowing and being known. As the Vedic sages proclaimed in the Kena Upanishad, Part 1, verses 1 to 5. By whom willed and directed does the mind light on its subjects? By whom commanded does prana the first move? By whose will do men speak this speech? What intelligence directs the eye and the ear? It is the ear of the ear, mind of the mind, tongue of the tongue, and also life of the life and eye of the eye. Being disabused of the false notion, the wise, having left this body, become immortal. The eye does not go there, nor speech, nor mind. We do not know that. We do not know how to instruct one about it. It is distinct from the known and above the unknown. We have heard it so stated by preceptors who taught us that. What speech does not enlighten, but what enlightens speech. Know that alone to be the Brahman, not this which people here worship. What one cannot think with the mind, but by which they say the mind is made to think. Know that alone to be the Brahman, not this which people here worship. The ultimate eye is the witnessing awareness itself, the pure consciousness that makes all seeing possible. While mythology and religion approached the eye through narrative and symbol, philosophy subjected vision to systematic analysis, examining how sight shapes knowledge, perception, beauty, and truth. From ancient Greece to modern phenomenology, the eye has remained central to understanding how we know what we know. Plato established vision as the paradigmatic metaphor for intellectual understanding in Western thought. In his Republic, he presents the famous allegory of the cave, where prisoners mistake shadows for reality until one escapes to see objects illuminated by the sun, a heroic path representing the mind's ascent from opinion to knowledge. Thus, true enlightenment. What makes this allegory so powerful is Plato's detailed analogy between physical sight and intellectual comprehension. Of all the organs of sense, he writes, the eye is the most like the sun, and the power which the eye possesses is a sort of effluence which is dispensed from the sun. Just as sunlight enables the eye to see physical objects, the light of truth enables the mind to perceive ideas. This connection culminates in Plato's description of the form of the good. The sun is not sight, but the author of sight who is recognized by sight. And this is he whom I call the child of the good, whom the good begat in his own likeness, to be in the visible world, in relation to sight and the things of sight, what the good is in the intellectual world in relation to mind and the things of mind. Plato's student Aristotle approached vision more empirically but maintained its privileged status. All men by nature desire to know, as is indicated by the love we have for our senses, even apart from their practical uses, and especially for that of sight because it tells us much about the differences between things, declared Aristotle in Metaphysics. Unlike Plato, who distrusted sensory perception, Aristotle saw vision as foundational to scientific investigation. In his treatise on the soul, he developed a sophisticated theory of visual perception involving an active medium between eye and object, a concept that would influence optical theory for centuries. Aristotle, ever attentive to the subtleties of perception, noted that when we close our eyes, we are not immersed in total darkness. Instead, we continue to see shifting colors, after images, and dreamlike forms, as evidence, he believed, that vision is not merely the passive reception of external objects, but involves an active inner faculty of the soul. Perception, in his view, was a dynamic interplay between the external world and the internal powers of the mind. This insight, rooted in careful observation rather than instrumentation, eerily anticipates the findings of modern neuroscience, which reveals that what we see is not a mirror of the world, but a construction of the brain, an unimaginably complex synthesis of sensory input, memory, expectation, and attention. Aristotle understood a truth that would take centuries to confirm. Seeing is as much about the mind as it is about the eyes. Plato also recognized the dangerous power of this vision. In his Symposium, Plato has Socrates claim that if virtue could be seen with bodily eyes, it would provoke overwhelming love. The implication is clear. Vision gives immediate access to reality in a way other senses cannot match, for better or worse. This is why Plato advocated censoring visual arts that might corrupt youth. He understood that images bypass rational defenses and imprint directly on the soul. The scientific revolution transformed understanding of vision from mysterious power to mechanical process. René Descartes, in his Rules for the Direction of the Mind, Rule 12, compared the eye to a camera obscura, carefully dissecting ox eyes to understand their structure. The first opaque structure in the eye receives the figure impressed upon it by the light with its various colors, and the first membrane. His detailed diagrams showed how light rays focus on the retina, creating inverted images that the brain somehow corrects. In The Passions of the Soul, Descartes went further, connecting vision directly to his mind-body dualism. In his view, physical light causes motions in the eye, which travel via animal spirits to the pineal gland, the seat of the soul and consciousness. If we see some animal approach us, the light reflected from its body depicts two images of it, one in each of our eyes, and these two images form two others by means of the optic nerves in the interior surface of the brain, which faces its cavities. Then from there, by means of the animal spirits with which its cavities are filled, these images so radiate towards the little gland. Some questions are needed. If vision involves mechanical processes creating representations in the brain, how can we be certain these representations match external reality? Thus, the gap between seeing and knowing widened. Baruch Spinoza addressed this in his Ethics, arguing that vision's reliability comes from our embodied integration with nature. If the motion communicated to our nervous system by objects presented through our eyes is conducive to our feeling of well-being, the objects which are its cause are said to be beautiful, while the objects which provoke a contrary motion are called ugly. For Spinoza, visual perception was neither purely subjective nor perfectly objective, but a relationship between our physical constitution and the world. John Locke distinguished between primary qualities that exist independently, like shape and motion, and secondary qualities that exist only in perception, like color. This distinction was famously challenged by George Berkeley's radical idealism, claiming that visual experience consists entirely of ideas in the mind. Berkeley's 1709 essay Towards a New Theory of Vision argued that distance perception is not innate, but learned through the association of visual cues with tactile experiences. A startlingly modern view, confirmed by later studies of patients gaining sight after congenital blindness. Immanuel Kant argued that the mind actively structures perception rather than passively receiving impressions, and for whatever reason. A revolutionary idea. In his Critique of Pure Reason, 1781, Kant proposed that space and time are not features of external reality, but forms of intuition that the mind imposes on sensory experience. We see objects in three-dimensional space not because space exists independently, but because our minds necessarily organize visual data spatially. In our experiences, Kant writes, it is easy to observe that it is only the continuous influences in all parts of space that can conduct our senses from one object to another, that the light which plays between our eyes and the heavenly bodies produces a mediating community between them and us, and thereby evidences their coexistence with us. Vision doesn't simply receive the world, it constitutes a world that conforms to the mind's categories. This insight redirected the philosophical focus on the eye. If vision actively constructs experience rather than reflecting reality, then different modes of seeing might reveal different truths. The eye was no longer just a window but a projector, not a passive receptor but an active creator. And you know how much I love creation. German idealists developed these insights further. Schelling wrote that, nature is visible spirit, spirit is invisible nature, suggesting that vision and reality exist in a dialectical relationship. Hegel proposed that vision evolves historically, with each epoch developing new ways of seeing that reveal previously invisible aspects of existence. His analysis of artistic ways of seeing anticipated later work by John Berger and Michel Foucault on how visual regimes encode power relationships. Friedrich Nietzsche pushed Kant's insight even further in the genealogy of morals, where he directly challenges the notion of objective, detached knowledge. He writes, "Let us guard against the dangerous old conceptual fiction that posited a pure, will-less, painless, timeless knowing subject. Let us guard against the tentacles of such contradictory concepts as pure reason, absolute spirituality, knowledge in itself." Nietzsche rejects the idea that one can see the world as it truly is, independent of the observer. Instead, he insists, there is only a seeing from a perspective, only a knowing from a perspective. And the more emotions we express over a thing, the more eyes, different eyes, we train on the same thing, the more complete will be our idea of that thing, our objectivity. But the elimination of the will altogether, the switching off of the emotions all and sundry, granted that we could do so, what? Would not that be called intellectual castration? This is a radical rethinking of how we experience and understand reality. For Nietzsche, all perception and knowledge are fundamentally interpretive. We never access a neutral, objective truth. Rather, we see through lenses shaped by our instincts, values, culture, and historical circumstances. The idea of a pure observer is a myth for Nietzsche, as every act of knowing is bound up in a perspective, a standpoint. What we call truth is really a kind of useful fiction, a perspective that has proven effective for a certain form of life. Nietzsche's perspectivism thus dismantles the notion of universal objectivity and replaces it with a dynamic model of knowledge that is plural, embodied, and value-laden. In doing so, he opens the door for later thinkers, the phenomenologists, the post-structuralists, and the existentialists, to rethink the nature of truth, vision, and subjectivity itself. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche writes, "Work and plaything are sense and spirit. Behind them still lies the self. The self also seeks with the eyes of the senses. It also listens with the ears of the spirit." This suggests a deeper seeing that transcends both sensory perception and intellectual understanding, a vision that arises from the authentic self, a psychology we will explore more deeply in the next section. In the 20th century, phenomenology brought new depth to understanding vision by examining lived visual experience as abstract theories lost popularity. Maurice Merleau-Ponty's masterwork, Phenomenology of Perception, 1945, argued that vision cannot be reduced to either physical processes or mental representations. It is fundamentally an embodied activity. In this work, Merleau-Ponty emphasized the inseparability of the perceiving subject and the perceived world. The body is our general medium for having a world. He further elaborated on the embodied nature of perception. Space and perception generally represent at the core of the subject the fact of his birth, the perpetual contribution of his bodily being, a communication with the world more ancient than thought. Merleau-Ponty's later work, The Visible and the Invisible, introduced the concept of flesh, la chair, neither mind nor matter, but the common substance of seer and seen. He wrote, "The thickness of flesh between the seer and the thing is constitutive for the thing of its visibility, as for the seer of his corporeity. It is not an obstacle between them, it is their means of communication." This radical insight collapsed the traditional subject-object distinction. The world sees itself through our eyes. This approach illuminated everyday visual experiences that philosophers had neglected. When we catch another person's gaze, we experience intersubjectivity directly, a crossing of perspectives that creates mutual recognition. When we see a horizon, we intuitively grasp that our vision has limits without experiencing those limits as barriers. When we recognize a face, we perceive not just features but expression, character, and personhood all at once. Martin Heidegger explored how technological developments transform not just what we see, but how the world reveals itself to us. In The Age of the World Picture, he argued that modern science reconfigures the world into an object of representation, something to be grasped, calculated, and controlled. Later, in The Question Concerning Technology, he introduced the concept of the standing reserve, bestand, describing how modern technology enframes beings as mere resources to be ordered and exploited. This technological mode of revealing differs fundamentally from contemplative or meditative vision, which encounters beings with a sense of reverence and allows them to appear in their own integrity. Jean-Paul Sartre dramatically explored the interpersonal dynamics of vision in being and nothingness, particularly in his famous analysis of the look, le regard. For Sartre, being seen by another person creates a fundamental disruption. I am for myself only as I am a pure reference to the other. The other looks at me, and as such, he holds the secret of my being. The other's gaze transforms me from subject to object, revealing aspects of myself inaccessible to my own vision. Hannah Arendt connected vision to political philosophy in The Human Condition, arguing that public visibility is essential for meaningful political life. Everything that appears in public can be seen and heard by everybody and has the widest possible publicity. For us, appearance constitutes reality. Democracy requires spaces where citizens can see and be seen by one another. Tyranny thrives when people are isolated, invisible to each other, though visible to power. Modern neuroscience and cognitive science have transformed philosophical understanding of vision. Where classical philosophers debated whether vision reveals or distorts reality, contemporary science suggests vision is a sophisticated information processing system optimized for evolutionary survival, rather than metaphysical truth. The neurobiologist David Marr proposed that vision operates through multiple levels of processing, from detecting basic features like edges and motion to constructing three-dimensional models and recognizing objects. Perception, in this view, is an active computational process. Philosopher Andy Clark built on these insights to develop the theory of predictive processing, suggesting that vision works through top-down predictions continuously revised by bottom-up sensory data. We don't see what is there. We see what our brains predict should be there, modified by unexpected sensory input. This explains certain optical illusions and hallucinations. These scientific approaches don't invalidate philosophy, but reframe it. Kant's intuition that the mind structure's visual experience aligns with neuroscience's discovery of the innate visual processing mechanisms. Merleau-Ponty's emphasis on embodied vision sounds similar to the research showing how eye movements, body position, and motor capabilities shape visual perception. Throughout philosophy's history, vision and knowledge have remained intimately connected. The Greek verb oida, I know, derives from the perfect tense of horao, I see, literally, I have seen, implying that to know something is to have seen it. The Latin video, I see, shares roots with vidi, I have seen, and visum, that which is seen, which gives us vision, visible, and visualization. This etymological connection reveals a profound truth. Vision is our paradigmatic metaphor for understanding. We speak of insight, perspective, illumination, clarity, reflection, outlook, and views. All of them are visual metaphors applied to knowledge. When we suddenly understand, we say, I see, or it's clear now. When understanding remains elusive, we are in the dark, or can't see the point. Our philosophical journey of the eye has been a progressive deepening of this relationship between seeing and knowing. From Plato's sun-like illumination to Kant's constructive vision to Merleau-Ponty's embodied gaze, philosophers have recognized that how we see shapes what we know, and what we know shapes how we see. Contemporary philosopher Donna Haraway captures this with her concept of situated knowledge. The recognition that all vision comes from somewhere. There is no view from nowhere, no God's eye perspective available to finite beings. Ex nihilo nihil fit. From nothing, nothing comes. But perhaps the most profound philosophical insight about vision comes from Ludwig Wittgenstein's recognition that seeing is not a single phenomenon, but a family of related activities. In his philosophical investigations, he distinguishes seeing as from simple seeing, the capacity to perceive the same visual stimulus in different ways, as when we suddenly recognize a face in a cloud or see the duck-rabbit figure shift from one animal to the other. This aspect perception reveals that vision involves interpretation, not just sensation. We don't just see, we see as. And this aspect of vision connects most deeply to human consciousness. Our capacity to perceive possibilities, relationships and meanings beyond mere physical presence. As Maurice Merleau-Ponty concluded, "The enigma is that my body simultaneously sees and is seen. That which looks at all things can also look at itself and recognize in what it sees the other side of its power of looking." This self-reflexive capacity of vision to see itself seeing mirrors the mind's ability to know itself knowing, creating the recursive loop that constitutes human consciousness. The philosophical journey of the eye thus leads us back to ourselves, to the recognition that in questioning how we see, we are ultimately questioning who we are. Vision is not just how we perceive the world, it is how we constitute ourselves as beings in relation to that world. The eye, philosophically considered, is nothing less than the portal through which consciousness encounters reality. While philosophy explores the relationship of vision to knowledge, psychology elaborates on the connection of the eye to the deeper layers of our consciousness. The eye becomes as a powerful symbol of the psyche, revealing the complex interplay between perception, projection, identity, and the unconscious mind. Carl Jung placed the eye at the center of his psychological system, recognizing it as one of humanity's most potent and universal archetypal symbols. In Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, Jung states directly that the eye symbolizes the observing and discriminating consciousness. For Jung, the eye represented the threshold between conscious and unconscious processes, a living symbol of psychic integration. Consciousness, like the sun, is an eye of the world, he writes in Mysterium Coniunctionis, quoting Renaissance philosopher Pico della Mirandola. This cosmic eye is a universal principle of consciousness manifesting through individual minds. Jung's analysis of eye symbolism in dreams and visions revealed multiple dimensions of meaning, some of which we are already familiar with. We encounter the autonomous eye. Eyes appearing independently in dreams often represent autonomous complexes within the psyche, in other words, fragments of consciousness that have developed their own luminosity or awareness. Jung writes of the multiple luminosities of the unconscious that express themselves through soul sparks, multiple eyes, polyophthalmia, and the starry heaven. Then we meet the divine eye. This eye appears in countless religious visions as a symbol of divine awareness. Jung interpreted this as the self, the archetype of wholeness, manifesting as a witnessing consciousness that encompasses both personal and transpersonal dimensions. The evil eye appears again. Jung recognized the evil eye as a psychological reality representing the destructive power of envy, projection, and unconscious forces. The evil one has many eyes, he writes in Liber Secundus, and losing one amounts to losing none. This multiplicity reveals how negative projections persist, even when partially recognized. We also learn about what might be called the compensatory eye. In Jungian dream analysis, eyes often symbolize awareness, insight, or perception. When eyes appear in dreams, especially when watching the dreamer, they may point to aspects of reality the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. Such imagery can reflect the psyche's self-regulating function, the unconscious compensating for conscious blind spots by presenting what the ego overlooks. This is consistent with Jung's broader view that dreams serve to balance and correct the one-sidedness of the waking personality. Carl Jung's psychological framework offers a profound exploration of how symbols like Christ, the mandala, and the eye connect to our understanding of the psyche. In his works, Jung weaves together these elements to reveal the path toward psychological wholeness. In Ion, Jung examines Christ as a representation of the self, the archetype of wholeness and the center of the total personality. He explains that the psychological concept of the self, in part derived from our knowledge of the whole man, but for the rest depicting itself spontaneously in the products of the unconscious, as an archetypal quaternity, bound together by inner antinomies, cannot omit the shadow that belongs to the light figure. This passage highlights Jung's understanding that true wholeness must embrace all aspects of the psyche, including those parts we might prefer to reject. The problem Jung identifies with the Christ symbol is precisely its perfection. Nevertheless, the Christ symbol lacks wholeness in the modern psychological sense, since it does not include the dark side of things, but specifically excludes it in the form of a Luciferian opponent. By externalizing evil as a separate entity, Satan, Christian symbolism creates a split that Jung believes must be reconciled for true psychological integration. This concept of wholeness emerges visually in Jung's work with mandalas. He writes, "The eye is the prototype of the mandala. The symbolism is rich. The eye that sees is also the structure that reflects the organization of the psyche itself." We'll expand on this soon. Jung further elaborates on this connection between the eye and consciousness when analyzing mandala imagery. The 16 globes painted in 4 colors just outside the circle derived originally from an eye motif and therefore stand for the observing and discriminating consciousness. Here we see how the eye motif represents awareness itself, the capacity to observe, discriminate, and integrate experience. The mandala, with its circular form often containing a quaternity, fourfold structure, provides the visual template for what the self should embody, a complete integration of all opposing forces within the psyche. The Christ figure, while powerful as a symbol of transformation, remains incomplete in Jung's view because it fails to incorporate the shadow aspects that are essential to complete selfhood. Through these interconnected symbols, Christ, the eye, and the mandala, Jung presents a roadmap for psychological development. The journey toward wholeness requires us to recognize and integrate all aspects of our nature, both light and dark, conscious and unconscious, in a unified self that, like the eye in the mandala, can see clearly from a centered position of awareness. Most significantly, Jung recognized the eye as a symbol of psychological reflection, as the psyche has the capacity to observe itself. "The soul," he notes, quoting the monk of Heisterbach, "is not only like to the sphere of the moon, but is furnished on all sides with eyes, ex omni parte oculata." This multidirectional vision represents the psyche's ability to witness itself from multiple perspectives simultaneously. While Jung emphasized the eye's archetypal dimensions, Sigmund Freud explored its connection to primal fears and desires. In his 1919 essay, The Uncanny, Freud analyzes E.T.A. Hoffmann's tale, The Sandman, where the protagonist is haunted by a childhood fear of having his eyes stolen, a fear Freud interprets as representing castration anxiety. We know from psychoanalytic experience, however, Freud writes, that this fear of damaging or losing one's eyes is a terrible fear of childhood. A study of dreams, fantasies, and myths has taught us that a morbid anxiety connected with the eyes and with going blind is often enough a substitute for the dread of castration. This interpretation reveals how the eye functions as a displacement for other anxieties, a symbolic condensation of deeper fears about violation, control, and identity. The vulnerability of the eye represents our existential vulnerability as beings who can be seen, known, and potentially harmed by the perceptions and actions of others. Freud's analysis also emphasized the eye's connection to narcissism. In his theory, the infant's primary narcissism involves visual reciprocity with the mother's gaze, a crucial stage for developing healthy self-regard. When this mirroring fails, psychological development is disrupted. Later, psychoanalytic theorists like Jacques Lacan would develop this into the concept of the mirror stage, where the child's recognition of its own image establishes the foundation of identity. The Freudian tradition also recognized the erotic dimension of vision, or the scopophilic drive, or pleasure in looking. Film theorist Laura Mulvey built on this to develop her influential concept of the male gaze, analyzing how visual art and cinema structure ways of seeing that objectify women. This opened new ways, seeing how power operates through vision, how the right to look and define what is seen reflects and reinforces social hierarchies. The psychological exploration of vision revealed its fundamental role in identity formation. Our sense of self emerges largely through visual feedback, both literal, seeing our reflection, observing others' reactions to us, and metaphorical, internalizing how others see us. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche writes, "Work and plaything are sense and spirit. Behind them still lies the self. The self also seeks with the eyes of the senses. It also listens with the ears of the spirit. Always the self listens and seeks. It compares, compels, conquers, destroys. It rules and is also the ruler of the ego." Jung commented on this passage in his 1953 seminar, noting, "I was already very interested in the concept of the self. The concept of the self continued to recommend itself to me. I thought that Nietzsche meant a sort of thing in itself, behind the psychological phenomenon. I saw then also that he was producing a concept of the self which was like the Eastern concept. It is an Atman idea. Thus, visual perception is connected with self-awareness. The self both sees and constructs what it sees, a recursive process that creates our sense of identity and reality. As developmental psychologist James Mark Baldwin observed, the infant must learn to distinguish between self-movement and object movement in the visual field, a fundamental perceptual achievement that establishes the boundary between self and world. Psychologist William James captured this reciprocal relationship in his concept of the social self, namely, the identity we construct through imagining how others see us. A man's social self is the recognition which he gets from his mates. Properly speaking, a man has as many social selves as there are individuals who recognize him. Our identity is constructed through this complex interplay of gazes, how we see ourselves, how others see us, and how we imagine others see us. The ancient belief that eyes are windows to the soul found scientific validation in modern psychology's discovery that pupil dilation, eye movement, and gaze direction reveal emotional states and cognitive processes invisible to other observational methods. As the eye to the sun, so the soul corresponds to God, Jung writes in Psychology and Alchemy. Since our conscious mind does not comprehend the soul, it is ridiculous to speak of the things of the soul in a patronizing or depreciatory manner. This analogy between eye and soul runs deeper than metaphor. Neurologically, the retina is actually an extension of the brain itself, and the only part of our central nervous system directly exposed to the external world. The eye is literally externalized brain tissue, capturing the paradoxical nature of consciousness as both internal witness and participant in the world it perceives. The psychological understanding of the eye as soul finds expression in the concept of witnessing consciousness, the aspect of awareness that observes our thoughts, emotions, and sensations without becoming identified with them. Meditation traditions across cultures cultivate this witness perspective as essential for psychological freedom and spiritual development. Psychologist Roberto Assagioli, founder of psychosynthesis, developed this concept through his disidentification exercise. I have a body, but I am not my body. I have emotions, but I am not my emotions. I have a mind, but I am not my mind. The exercise culminates in identifying with the witnessing consciousness itself, the I, that observes all these aspects without being reduced to any of them. Psychology's investigation of attention, which is the mind's ability to focus selectively on certain aspects of experience, revealed a fundamental truth. We see what we attend to, and we attend to what we value. Attention functions as an eye of the mind, determining what enters consciousness and what remains unseen. William James famously defined attention as the taking possession by the mind, in clear and vivid form, of one out of what seems several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thought. It implies withdrawal from some things in order to deal effectively with others. This selective function means that vision is always partial. We necessarily see some aspects of reality at the expense of others. Modern cognitive psychology has confirmed James's insights through phenomena like inattentional blindness, our failure to notice unexpected objects when attention is focused elsewhere. In the classic invisible gorilla experiment, subjects counting basketball passes often fail to notice a person in a gorilla suit walking through the scene, a dramatic demonstration that we literally do not see what we are not looking for. This selective nature of attention has profound psychological implications. As psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi observed, what we attend to creates our reality. The direction of our mental gaze shapes what we perceive, but how we experience reality. Depression, anxiety, and other psychological conditions involve pathological patterns of attention that create self-reinforcing cycles of perception. Consciousness itself, in many traditions, is understood as fundamentally attentional. The Sanskrit term manas, mind, refers to both attention and awareness. Jung notes in Mysterium Conjunctionis that the Sanskrit word manas means mind. It includes all intellectual as well as emotional processes, and can therefore mean, on the one hand, understanding, intellect, reflection, thought, etc., and on the other, soul, heart, conscience, desire, will, etc. This connection between attention and mind appears in the Rig Veda, which states, "The moon was gendered from his mind, and from his eye the sun had birth." Jung interprets this. This refers to the two eyes of Purusha, the macrocosmic primordial man, Anthropos, who created the world by transforming himself into it. Perhaps Jung's most significant insight into eye symbolism comes through his analysis of the mandala, the circular cosmic diagram that represents psychological wholeness. The eye is the prototype of the mandala, he writes in Mandala Symbolism, quoting the mystic Jakob Boehme, who calls his mandala the philosophique globe, or eye of ye wonders of eternity, or looking glass of wisdom. Jung elaborates, "Our mandala is indeed an eye, the structure of which symbolizes the center of order in the unconscious. The eye is a hollow sphere, black inside, and filled with a semi-liquid substance, the vitreous humor. Looking at it from outside, one sees a round colored surface, the iris with a dark center from which a golden light shines." This analogy reveals how the eye's structure mirrors the psyche's organization around a luminous center, the self, surrounded by the darkness of the unconscious. The mandala's concentric patterns reflect the eye's structure and function, focusing attention toward a center while maintaining awareness of the periphery. Boehme calls it a fiery eye, Jung continues, in accordance with the old idea that seeing emanates from the eye. The eye may well stand for consciousness, which is in fact an organ of perception, looking into its own background. It sees its own light there, and when this is clear and pure, the whole body is filled with light. This self-reflexive quality, consciousness perceiving itself, represents the culmination of psychological development. The integrated psyche becomes like an eye that can see in all directions simultaneously, encompassing both conscious and unconscious dimensions without being identified exclusively with either. The soul, Jung quotes Boehme as saying, is an eye in the eternal abyss, a similitude of eternity, a perfect figure and image of the first principle, and resembles God the Father in his person as to the eternal nature. This description unites psychological and spiritual visions of the eye as a symbol of completed selfhood, or awareness that has recognized its own ground and source. Psychology also reveals how vision operates collectively, shaping cultural consciousness through shared ways of seeing. Social psychologists have documented how group belonging influences what we literally perceive. Members of the same culture attend to different visual features and interpret ambiguous images in similar ways. This social vision extends beyond perception to imagination, where the collective images, ideals, and possibilities a culture constellate. Psychologist Jerome Bruner observed that cultures provide ready-made ways of seeing that both enable and constrain what members can imagine. These shared patterns of attention and imagination constitute what might be called the collective eye of a society. Media theorist Marshall McLuhan analyzed how communication technologies transform this collective vision. "The medium is the message," he famously declared, meaning that each new visual technology, from writing to printing to photography to television to digital media, restructures perception, creating new possibilities for seeing while closing off others. In his groundbreaking work, Ways of Seeing, art critic John Berger applied this insight to visual art, demonstrating how Renaissance paintings' ways of seeing encoded power relationships and social hierarchies that continue to influence contemporary visual culture. French philosopher Michel Foucault further developed this through his concept of the gaze, the internalized perspective of authority that disciplines behavior even when no one is physically watching. Contemporary surveillance culture represents the logical extension of this disciplinary gaze, what social theorist Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism, where our every digital interaction is observed, recorded, and commodified. The psychological impact of this omnipresent observation transforms social behavior and self-perception, creating what psychologist Kenneth Gergen terms the saturated self, an identity constantly performing for real or imagined observers. Dream research has consistently found eyes to be among the most common and significant dream symbols. In his extensive dream studies, Carl Jung documented recurring patterns: eyes in unusual places, multiplicity of eyes, the autonomous eye injury or blindness, animal eyes. Jung interpreted these dream motifs as the psyche's attempts to expand consciousness beyond its habitual limitations. "The spirit of the depths opened my eyes," he writes in Liber Primus, "and I caught a glimpse of the inner things, the world of my soul, the many-formed and changing." Psychologist James Hillman extended this approach through his concept of seeing through, namely the soul's capacity to perceive archetypal dimensions within ordinary experience. Hillman writes in The Soul's Code that the world doesn't consist of merely objects and things. It is filled with useful, playful, and intriguing opportunities. The oriole doesn't see a branch, but an occasion for perching. The cat doesn't see a thing we call an empty box. It sees safe hiding for peering. The bear doesn't smell honeycomb, but the opportunity for delicious feeding. The world is buzzing and blooming with information, which is always available and never absent. This visionary capacity represents the ultimate goal of depth psychology. Not just understanding the unconscious, but developing new ways of seeing that reveal deeper dimensions of reality. The psychological journey of the eye culminates in the capacity for true self-reflection, vision turned inward to witness its own processes. As Plato intuited in the first Alcibiades, then if an eye is to see itself, it must look at an eye, and at that region of the eye in which the virtue of an eye is found to occur, and this, I presume, is sight. Modern psychology confirms this insight through concepts like metacognition, thinking about thinking, and mentalization, understanding mental states in self and others. These capacities represent the evolutionary achievement of consciousness, the ability to observe itself in operation and adjust accordingly. This reflexive vision appears across spiritual traditions as the pinnacle of psychological development. Hindu yoga speaks of witnessing consciousness or higher self, Sakshi Chaitanya. Buddhist mindfulness cultivates bare attention, sati. Christian contemplation involves the prayer of quiet witnessing, and Jewish mysticism describes ayin, the eye void, where ordinary perception dissolves into pure awareness. The common thread in these traditions is the recognition that complete seeing involves witnessing the act of seeing itself, becoming aware of how we construct our perceptions rather than being unconsciously determined by them. This represents psychological freedom in its deepest sense. Not freedom from external constraints, but freedom from unconscious conditioning of perception. Jung's words from Mysterium Conjunctionis are a great conclusion. When consciousness draws near to the unconscious, not only does it receive a devastating shock, but something of its light penetrates into the darkness of the unconscious. The result is that the unconscious is no longer so remote and strange and terrifying, and this paves the way for an eventual union. This illumination represents the psychological culmination of the eye's journey, the integration of conscious and unconscious vision into a more comprehensive awareness. The eye that has completed this journey sees external objects and the processes of seeing itself, the world that surrounds it and the world which is constructed through perception, others and the self that perceives them. It encompasses both the I that sees and the me that is seen. uniting subject and object in a singular act of comprehensive vision. In this integration, the psychological eye fulfills its deepest potential. It becomes a living symbol of consciousness awakened to its own nature and source. We've traced the eye through myth, religion, philosophy, and psychology. The remaining journey continues on Patreon through esoteric traditions, modern surveillance, and tomorrow's vision. So join me there. The deeper mysteries await.